Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we'll be talking about what the box office preview is looking like for Eternals. I always want to say The Eternals, but no, the film is just Eternals, and how it is not looking good for this film, and that should come as a surprise to very few people. Before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. Also smash the rumble button if you're watching over there. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel with a bell notification on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So Eternals, the new film by Chloe Zhao and also from Marvel Studios by way of Disney, is eyeing a $75 million opening weekend as the media continues to try and spin this film, and any film for that matter, that they want to support, by saying it also ranks among Fandango's second best pre-seller of the year. And we all know that ticket sales, pre-sale ticket sales especially, don't always tell the entire story. Remember that they were trying to spin the narrative that Solo, a Star Wars story, was so successful in selling early tickets, and then that film ended up being a massive $150 million plus loss for Disney. Eternals is looking like it is going to be in a very similar category because of a massive $200 million budget, though the film does only need to make $500 million at least to break even based off of the numbers that are being reported and based off of typical marketing and typical numbers standards. But let's go ahead and dive into the story from Deadline. The domestic box office is in store for a resurge again this weekend. Again, I love how they try to spin this as a major positive for Disney Marvel. All right, as The Eternals comes out this weekend, the movie is heading towards a $75 million opening frame in 4,000 locations, with previews beginning today, Thursday, at 6 p.m. Fandango is reporting that Chloe Zhao directed feature is now the second best pre-seller among this year's blockbusters per advance ticket sales. Eternals is pacing ahead of Marvel Studios' Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which previously held the position, and behind only Marvel's Black Widow. Yes, films that, when you look at the opening weekend numbers, in comparison to a lot of other Marvel films, are not really the highest amongst. And of course, everyone says, but the pandemic. But I then raise you a Venom 2, which made $90 million its opening weekend and actually outdid the first film in the franchise, which came out not during pandemic times. What say you to that? That's right. Quiet your mouths now. In overall exhibitor pre-sales, which includes Fandango, Deadline here is that Eternals has already banked $13 million, which is 13% behind Black Widow at the same point in time, and 25% ahead of Shang-Chi. And you'll see how those numbers really don't match up with what the film is projected to make and how off it'll be from films like Black Widow, etc. And it says here that the movie is tracking strong with males, Hispanics. I'm surprised that they use the word Hispanic there, African Americans, and Asian audiences. And that doesn't really mean a whole lot of anything, because what matters is people. People are what matter. It's amazing how the media is so tone deaf, is so blind to the reality around them, that they, again, love to break people into categories instead of seeing people simply as people. The slowdown from the Pic's $80 million plus original projection stems from the fact that it's being the worst reviewed MCU movie to date, which is currently 54% rotten on Rotten Tomatoes, if you still take that site seriously. And I would say probably one of the bigger issues is the fact that it's a 2-hour and 37-minute film. Now, to Deadline's credit, they do mention the fact that Venom, even though the first film had a terrible Rotten Tomatoes rating at least, had $80 million opening weekend, and the Let There Be Carnage, which was a fresh rating, made $90 million in its opening weekend. But again, pandemic time, $90 million. Any film to make less than $90 million now during pandemic times does not really have any excuse other than the films not being what audiences really want to go see, or at least not being able to dredge up enough support amongst those people. Yes, you could probably bring up things like the runtime of the film. As I mentioned, that is definitely a big help for Venom 2 being only a 90-minute movie, and the film, of course, with Eternals being 2.5 hours. But if people really want to go see a film, they will go out of their way to still go see a film. And the fact that this is expected to come in well below what Venom 2 was able to do is, I think, something easily worth talking about. As you can see, Eternals zaps up second best opening day in Korea during the pandemic. MCU movie eyes $150 million worldwide. So they expect the film to make around $75 million here, and I guess another $75 million in the overseas market. It says it's set up to keep the fall box office rally going. Ah, yes, it's a rally. Looking at the global opening, $150 million, a number that is poised to be to best the $128 million worldwide start for Shang-Chi, Legend of the Ten Rings, and emulate the $150 million filed by Black Widow, which had a Disney Plus premiere day and date component in select markets, including in the United States. Yes, in both of those films, or at least rather in the case of Black Widow, not really a huge financial box office hit, especially with the money they had to pay for the lawsuit against Scarlett Johansson, whereas Shang-Chi and the Legend of Ten Rings was able to make its money back, but it also costs $50 million less. Already out of the gate, the Marvel Cinematic Universe title from Oscar-winning Chloe Zhao is at number 1 at the Wednesday box office in Korea, becoming the second best opening day in the country. So as you can see, they are clearly trying to spin the narrative that this is going to be, amazing because look at all those amazing oh man, look at those effects. It's just amazing. The box office numbers are phenomenal. $150 million. We'll see how close it actually gets to that number. One thing that will help this film is the fact that it is opening up in the same markets or in similar markets on the same day. So this is a film that I will actually be able to make some projections and predictions on, whereas previous films to come out have been a little bit more difficult. Films like Dune, for instance, which came out in multiple markets at different times, becomes a lot more hard to track exactly what the likely outcome will be. All we can really do is look to the actual numbers compared to how much money it needs to actually break even. When it comes to this film, it needs to make $500 million to break even because, as you can see, that $200 million production budget, again, is something that requires it to reach that as such. Black Widow, as we can see right here, never was able to reach that amount. Now, some people try to add on to it saying, okay, yes, but there were some Disney Plus numbers that we have to add to the equation there, right? So those Disney Plus numbers, those mean something, right? The issue with that, of course, is the fact that some of that got eaten into by the lawsuit that they settled with Scarlett Johansson, and so therefore that would cut into any of those extra profits that they may have made. But let's look at those opening weekends as far as the actual, in comparison to other MCU films and MCU titles. So Shang-Chi made $75 million, so they're expecting this film to make about as much as Shang-Chi did in the domestic marketplace opening weekend. The difference is that I don't see Eternals having the same kind of domestic run as Shang-Chi did, because again, Shang-Chi was a very unique film in the audiences that they were directing the film at, and they were able to get to turn out to the film. I doubt that they will be able to have the same success there, and so we probably were not looking like this number being a possibility. This one is a little bit more likely in the cards just because they were able to push a Black Widow film, but remember that Black Widow, also a very well-known entity, well-known property, a film that people had been asking for a very long time. But isn't it interesting here that if you look to the charts, looking at the charts right here, right, $417 million for Shang-Chi, the unknown property, versus $376 million for Black Widow. I think it says more about Black Widow as a film than it does about Shang-Chi as a film. But again, I digress there. But if you compare this to other films to come out in the MCU, this is looking like a film that is very similar to a movie like Ant-Man and the Wasp, which had a very small opening, but also had, by the end of its run, a pretty sizable worldwide box office. Highly doubt that the film Eternals will get anywhere close to that. You also have other films in the mix like Doctor Strange, which ended up doing pretty well internationally. Also films like the first Ant-Man, which again also was able to do pretty well internationally with a much smaller budget on top of that. Another film in the same category would be Thor: The Dark World, which even though obviously seen as one of the worst of the MCU films, obviously still was able to make a sizable amount worldwide. Captain America, the first Avenger. Obviously, these are not adjusted for inflation, but as you can see right there, still making $370 million worldwide. And again, that would have been a lot more when you adjust those numbers for inflation. But really, it's not going to be one of the highest opening films ever in the MCU, and that massive $200 million production budget is going to be a huge Achilles heel, regardless of how much money this film actually makes. Now remember that this is a movie that was originally pegged to make around $80 million, according to the early box office projections. As you all know, I typically like to use a site called BoxOfficePro.com, and they themselves, right, have a specific range that they've given to this film, and they had even mentioned, right, that the projections had dropped. A lot of that was because of the numbers that were given, but right now their range is between $67 and $92 million, and so again, $75 million would fall right in the mix of that, but we could easily see this film fall closer to $70 million. Could also fall closer to $80 to $85 million. It really just depends on who and how many people show up to this movie, and they expect the long-range domestic, the total domestic, to be somewhere between 165 and 215. So based on that average, it looks likely that this film will probably not reach $200 million domestically based on these original estimates, and we'll have to, of course, wait and see for actual raw data to come out. That's what I love about these websites right here, is that they always try and spin the narrative right first off, like, what the hell is even going on here? Like, I don't even want to know. Who sees the image right here and says, I want to know more about this character. I want to know who this character is. Honestly, I want to know who that person is who's like, ooh, I want to know who that random kid who, what was even going on there with the glasses. I want to know more about them. I would love to know that. But again, I love how, again, they continue to try and say, oh, but if you look at the pre-sales. But as I mentioned before, pre-sales have some impact, but don't make the entire story because, again, Solo Star Wars story had great pre-sales, at least according to the people at the time. Ended up not doing very well at the box office, and it's because a lot of people just show up on the day. I actually got to go see Dune in IMAX last night, which was a really cool experience. By the way, the score is actually a lot better when you're actually able to experience the fullness of the score in an IMAX screen, like with the actual full booming soundtrack in your face. By the way, the ending, especially of part 1, you're just like, what? It's just great. Like, the score-wise, like, not in the story. The story, you're still like, really, this is where we're going to end the story? But with the score, you're like, oh, man, this is actually pretty good. Anyway, I digress with that. Still, there were actually people in line going to get tickets, which was pretty exciting to see. My theater had a good, 50 to 60 people in it, maybe more than that. Probably about a third of the film was actually filled in the IMAX, so that was also pretty exciting to see as well. So people will show up on the day to go see a film and not pre-order tickets, and so that is always the factor that is the hardest to be able to predict, which is why whenever they try and use these different metrics like pre-sales, yes, it tells part of the story, but it doesn't tell the entire thing. In the end, what we see, though, is that their projections are dropping. $75 million would be a very poor opening for a film like this, and I would expect that this film will probably fall somewhere between $65 and $85 million by the end of the weekend. But once those numbers come in, we'll be able to use those numbers, break them down, see exactly where this film is tracking, especially worldwide as well. Remember, the number they're giving is $150 million worldwide opening. Let's see how close it actually gets to that number, and remind ourselves, it has to make $500 million to break even. But what are your thoughts about this? Do you think that Eternals is going to have, again, a pretty poor opening weekend by MCU standards, putting it towards the bottom of the pack? And again, if you keep trying to say, yeah, but pandemic, okay, Venom 2. Okay, I'll wait. Anyway, let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comments section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button, and smash that rumble button. It really does mean a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my November Patreon, Subscribestar, and Locals members. Starting first off with Patreon, Andrew Hoyle, animation commentator, Brandon, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Dolores Ed, Dion, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father. Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob the Juice, JC, Jeffrey Toon, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Gomer Kyle 79, Laura the Modern Major General Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange at Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Ullen, Stan Andrian, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina Bojan, and Tina B, the Empress of the Universe. And a shout out to my Subscribestar members, UAB, Mad Dog, Storm Tracker, The R, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, Stan 4, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J, Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, and J Rod, the Beer Guru, and of course, ZK Man. Thank you very much for supporting me over there. And to my 3 supporters over on locals.com, Kara Tharp, Bifford a Hobbit, and Robert Barnes. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and every video I do on the channel, check out that top link in the description below to find out how to sign up to the various levels that exist, including the most basic level where you get a shout out, the secondary level, the Army of Asgard, where you get that, plus access to a giveaways exclusive server where I give away things like 4Ks and Blu-rays and digital codes. all kinds of stuff, a lot of fun. You then also have the Keeper of the Bifrost level where you get all that stuff, plus access to an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger. You get to ask us questions, and you get also access to that and the entire library of podcast episodes that we have done. And then there is, of course, the Chosen of Valhalla level, where not only do you get all of that, but also in your first month, you get a t-shirt of your choice and sent to you anywhere in the world. Of course, just let me know your size and the color option that you want. It'll be sent to you that first month. And also, you get to be featured on the once a month Chosen of Valhalla live stream, where we have a ton of fun talking about movies and projects and all kinds of stuff. Pretty much anything that the Chosen wants to talk about is on the table. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, check out that top link. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.